Imran Khan, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. We speak a month after the collapse of the Afghan government and the takeover of the Taliban. How would you describe the situation in Afghanistan today?
I think it's worrying. Afghanistan is on a historic crossroads. One, if it goes well, and we pray that this works in the direction of peace after 40 years in Afghanistan, if this Taliban hold all of Afghanistan, and if they can sort of now work towards an inclusive government, get all the factions together, Afghanistan could have peace after 40 years. But if it goes wrong, and which is what we are really worried about, it could go to chaos, the biggest humanitarian crisis, a huge refugee problem, unstable Afghanistan, and the reason why the US came in was to fight terrorism or international terrorists. So unstable Afghanistan, refugee crisis, and the possibility of, again, terrorism from Afghanistan soil.
You have said that a positive outcome for Afghanistan would be an inclusive government. Would you call this an inclusive government? Do you support it?
Well, let me just, Becky, explain to the viewers that my party came into power after 22 years. So 22 years we stayed in opposition before we came to power. When we got into power, there was so much pressure for us to include those people who had struggled for 22 years. So they almost had felt that it was a right that they should be included. So I can see the problems they are facing. But I do not think that there would be really peace in Afghanistan unless there's an inclusive government, because Afghanistan is a society composed of different ethnic groups. So the Pashtun is only about 45–50%. They are Tajiks, they are Hazara, they are Uzbeks. So unless it's an inclusive government, the worry is that there will be instability later on.
Well, it's not. It's not an inclusive government at present. Let's agree on that. Afghanistan, you said, had broken the, quote, shackles of slavery when the Taliban took back power. That doesn't sound like the statement of someone who shares the concerns of so many in the world about the future of Afghanistan and its people under the Taliban, notorious for its misogyny, its violence against women, that shows no evidence or interest in guaranteeing basic human rights, particularly those for women.
But
let's just talk about its makeup.
So it has to be put in its context. What was the context? I spoke. For the first time in history, in 74 history of Pakistan, we had what we called was trying to get rid of the colonial system of education. So colonial system of education was a tiny elite had this colonial English medium education, and the masses had another Urdu medium education. And this created two classes. And so for the first time, we had a unified curriculum in our history. And what I was trying to say was that mental slavery, which comes from the colonial form of education, is much worse than physical slavery. And one line I gave example of, in Afghanistan, they have got freedom. Now, I never quite understood what was the issue behind it, because when the British left, it was freedom for Afghanistan. When the Soviets left, it was freedom. So when the US leave, what am I supposed to say?
This interim government is not an inclusive government. The concerns of so many around the world are for the future of Afghanistan and its people under a Taliban government which is notorious for its misogyny and its violence against women. There is no evidence to date of any interest in providing basic human rights, particularly for women and children. How concerned are you about that. This is an interim government, you might tell me, but you know what? The last Taliban government was an interim government and it lasted 5 years. So how concerned are you? And what are you going to do about it?
Look, Becky, where Afghanistan goes from here, I'm afraid none of us can predict. We can hope and pray that there's peace after 40 years, that the Taliban, what they have said, that they want an inclusive government, they want women rights in their own context, they want human rights, they've given amnesty. So far what they have said, clearly they want international acceptability. They did not go for international acceptability when they were between 1996 to 2001. This time, clearly they're making the statements where they want this acceptability. So we should try and incentivize them in that direction. But there's another fallacy. Afghanistan cannot be controlled by outside. They have a history. No puppet government in Afghanistan is supported by the people. It gets discredited amongst the people. So rather than sitting here and thinking that we can sort of control them, we should incentivize them. Because Afghanistan, this current government, clearly feels that without international aid and help, they will not be able to stop this crisis. So incentivize them, push them in the right direction.
If it seeks legitimacy, it will need to show evidence that it shares the values of those that it is seeking legitimacy for, and that being the West, for example. I grew up watching you as a star of Pakistan's cricket team. The Taliban have said that women shouldn't play cricket. In fact, they've said women shouldn't be involved in sport at all. This is the sort of Taliban that we are seeing today. Do you support that? I mean, women have been protesting about more inclusivity, about their rights. We know women, first-hand experience, women are too frightened to come out of their homes. They're too frightened to go to the workplace if they're allowed at all. They've been flogged. I mean, do you support their cause?
Look, Becky, first of all, let us just compare what happened after the Soviets left in 1989 and compare to what the situation is right now when the US has departed from Afghanistan. When the Soviets left in 1989, the sort of bloodbath that took place, over 200,000 Afghans died in that bloodbath. Now compare that to what has happened now. Frankly, I mean, we were all relieved. We expected a bloodbath. When Ashraf Ghani said that he left Afghanistan because he was scared of a bloodbath in Kabul, well, it could have happened. We were worried that when the US departed, there would be complete chaos in Afghanistan, a civil war. Our intelligence agencies told us that the Taliban would not be able to take over all of Afghanistan. And if they tried to take over Afghanistan militarily, there would be a protracted civil war, which is what we were scared of, because we are the ones who would suffer the most. So therefore now, in that, bearing in mind what could have happened and what has happened, I feel give them time. I feel very strongly that it's a mistake to think that someone from outside will give Afghan women rights. Afghan women are strong. Give them time. They will get their rights.
You've just alluded to your very real concerns about the risks of civil war, the risks to Afghanistan, and indeed the risks to Pakistan. I want to come back to your very real concerns about the risks to Pakistan's national security in a moment. But bear with me, you have criticised the US pullout. Let me start that again. You have criticised the US pullout from Afghanistan, describing America as having messed it up in Afghanistan. Is that something that you have told the US president personally? Have the two of you spoken since the collapse of the country?
I have spoken to, then he was Senator Joe Biden, way back in 2008. After 2006, we in Pakistan began to realize that this is now going to become a quagmire for the US. I went over to the US. I met Senator John Biden, Senator John Kerry, and Senator Harry Reid. I also addressed various think tanks in the US. And I tried to explain to them there is a history of Afghanistan. What the US is trying to achieve militarily, this is not going to happen. And so they will be stuck there. Our army chief in 2010, he went over to the US. He tried to tell President Obama that you're not going to have a military victory. The Afghan army is not going to be able to, the moment you go, it will wilt. So we were warning them beforehand. And when the US should have started from a position of strength to do a political settlement with the Taliban when there were 150,000 US troops there.
Let me stop you there. You haven't spoken to the President of the United States since the collapse of the country to the Taliban, correct?
No, I haven't.
He hasn't called you since coming into office, correct?
He's a busy man.
Pakistan is a major non-NATO ally, and yet no call between you and the US President. Do you see this as punishment for supporting the Taliban while they were killing US troops?
Well, you have to ask him why he's too busy to call. But let me just say one thing. I heard this, the Senate hearing going on, which Secretary Blinken was asked all these questions. I want to say this, and I hope that the American politicians would listen to this. You know, Pakistan is the country. Just because we sided with the US, we became an ally of the US after 9/11 in the war in Afghanistan. The suffering this country went through. At one point, there were 50 militant groups attacking our government. In the 80s, Pakistan joined the US against the Soviets. We trained the Mujahideen to do jihad in Afghanistan. Amongst them was Al-Qaeda, Taliban were part of the Mujahideen groups. We trained them that foreign occupation, fighting against them, is a sacred duty. It's jihad, it's a holy war. Fast forward to 9/11, US needs us in Afghanistan. They asked us to join us. A lot of people said that we were abandoned in 1989. US, after the war was over, left, sanctioned Pakistan. So come 2001, George Bush asked Pakistan to help. And he famously said, we will not abandon Pakistan again. Pakistan joined the US war in Afghanistan. Was I the Prime Minister? I would never have done that. Firstly, the same Mujahideen, now we are telling them because US has invaded Afghanistan, now it's terrorism. They turn against us. Then all the tribal belt of Pashtuns on our side of the border, the Pashtun nationalism kicked in. So they had all sympathies with the Taliban, not because religious ideology, because of Pashtun ethnicity. So you must understand what happened. No, I really want people to know. They turned against the Pakistan army as collaborators. So the jihadis turned against us, the Pashtuns turned against us, and the more we tried the military operations in civilian areas, the more collateral damage, the more. So we had 50 militant groups attacking us. And on top of it, they must also know, there were 480 drone attacks by the US in Pakistan. Only time a country has been attacked by its ally. So we almost went under. Had it not been for our army, a disciplined army and best intelligence agencies, you know, we lost 80,000 people. 80,000 Pakistanis died in it. And on top of it, rather than one word of appreciation, I saw them blaming us.
Well, the fact
they said there were safe havens in Pakistan.
The fact is, Washington, it seems, just can't trust Pakistan. There are calls by lawmakers to reassess the relationship with Islamabad now, to reassess its status as a major non-NATO ally. This was the exchange during the US Secretary of State's congressional testimony on Afghanistan on Monday. Republican Keating, we used to hear we had a complicated relationship with Pakistan. I would say it is duplicitous. Anthony Blinken agreed with the assessment of the role that Pakistan has played over the past 20 years. This is the top diplomat, the US Secretary of State, and he went on to say this, Prime Minister, it's been a role that has involved hedging its bets constantly about the future of Afghanistan. It's one that involved harbouring members of the Taliban, including the Haqqanis. Is that true? And what's your response?
They are ignorant. I was listening to them. I have never heard such ignorance. They are absolutely clueless, number one, about what happened in Afghanistan. They were all in a state of shock. We knew, as I said, in 2008, when I met Senator Joe Biden and John Kerry, then I told them that they were not winning. Hold on, hold on. This is, Becky, it's very important. When our army chief went in 2010, he again explained to President Obama that you're not winning this war. And he said, and this is the important thing. He said, you are going to leave Afghanistan. We will be left with the mess you leave behind. What you are expecting us to do, we cannot do. What they were expecting, what they were expecting at the Afghan government. The Afghan government wanted Pakistan to win the war in Afghanistan for them. Pakistan, the state of Pakistan was under attack for being ally of the US. We were now supposed to take on also the Afghan Taliban.
I was asking you for your response to Blinken's words specifically. He said Pakistan's role has involved hedging its bets constantly about the future of Afghanistan. It's one that involved harbouring members of the Taliban, including the Haqqanis. Over the past 20 years, sir, the Haqqani network has been responsible for some of the deadliest terror attacks in Afghanistan's history. It has killed hundreds of Western troops and thousands, let me finish, of Afghan people. In 2011, you will be aware that General Mike Mullen said the Haqqani network acted as, quote, a veritable arm of Pakistan's intelligence. This is a group that now has 4 members in key roles in the Taliban government. Is it any wonder that there is a trust deficit between the West and Pakistan?
It is complete ignorance. The Americans did not understand what the Haqqani network was. Haqqani is a tribe. It's a Pashtun tribe living in Afghanistan. What they are
terrorist organization prescribed and designated by the US and the UN, sir, with respect.
All very well calling them a terrorist organization, but do they know the origins of the Haqqani tribe? No, it is very important for us to explain to them. We have been trying to explain to them. The Haqqani tribe lives in Afghanistan. 40 years ago, when the Afghan Jihad took place, we had 5 million Afghan refugees in Pakistan. Amongst them were a few of the Haqqanis. And the Haqqanis were Mujahideen, were fighting the Soviets. So once the Soviets left and civil war broke out, we still had 3 million refugees in Pakistan. So in those refugee camps, and when they say safe havens, what are these safe havens? I mean, I noticed them calling the area of Pakistan along the border of Afghanistan had the heaviest surveillance by the United States drones. If the United States drones conducted 480 drone attacks on its ally, surely they would have known if there were any safe havens. So, number one of the Haqqanis family they were born in a Pakistan refugee camp. So, what they were asking us was that in these refugee camps, 3 million people living in the refugee camps, we were supposed to check which one of them was Taliban and which not.
That doesn't deny the fact that the Pakistan Intelligence Agency has been funding and supporting the Taliban through the Haqqani network.
Funding. You know the total budget of Pakistan? It's $50 billion for 220 million people. $50 billion. Americans were spending $300 million a day. They spent $2 trillion. Did we have the capacity to fund another war? We can barely meet our own expenses.
Let me put this to you. The term duplicity has been used now a number of times with regard the role that Pakistan has played over the last 20 years. Osama bin Laden was hiding in Pakistan and killed in 2011 near a Pakistani military city base. Many Americans categorize Pakistan's role in Afghanistan post 9/11 as duplicitous. I put it to you again. Is it any wonder that there is a trust deficit between Pakistan and the West? And what are you going to do about it?
Do you know, Becky, I blame First General Musharraf. He should have never taken us into this war. Taliban, whatever you say about a government, and a relationship between governments are because of interests. Taliban was a pro-Pakistan government. We helped the US dislodge a pro-Pakistan government and replace it by a pro-Indian government. And unfortunately, General Musharraf did this, not for the interest of the people of Pakistan, because we, as a result, we also, as I repeat, had a civil war. We were attacked, considered collaborators by the Pashtuns and by the Mujahideen. So listen, General Musharraf wanted acceptability from the US. So he went against Pakistan's interest to support the US. Then unfortunately we had two crooked leaders who had billions trashed abroad, who never ever stood up for Pakistan's interest. So here we were losing people, 80,000 Pakistanis dying to side with the Americans. On top of it, we are called that we are playing a double game. Pakistan was trying to save itself. Listen, Becky, you have to understand this. 50 different militant groups were attacking the state of Pakistan. I repeat, if we did not have a disciplined army and intelligence agency, we were going under. And on top of it, we had Americans doing these drone attacks. Reprisals from the drone attacks were on the state of Pakistan. All the collateral damage they took avenged against us. On top of it, they wanted us to take on the Afghan Taliban. Afghan Taliban weren't attacking us. And I wish, if I was in government, I would have told the US that we are not going to take them on militarily, because first we have to save the people. My responsibility would have been to the people of my country. I cannot destroy my country to fight someone else's war.
Let's talk about this Haqqani network and its relationship with ISI, because you have admitted that Pakistan's intelligence agency has close ties to the Haqqani network. You have said in the past that you're not sure why the US hasn't leveraged those connections to get the Taliban effectively to the negotiating table. You've always supported dialogue with the Taliban. How much do you, sir, support their ideology, and what is your red line? The strict interpretation of Sharia law as we are seeing it acted out in Afghanistan today?
Becky, let's take two different things you've said. Pakistan's ties with the Afghan Taliban, Pakistan's intelligence agencies. Intelligence agencies' job is to have connections with everyone. They speak to everyone. The US CIA would be speaking to Taliban. You know, they have to. That's the job of intelligence agencies. Question is, was Pakistan in a position to take military action against the Afghan Taliban when it was already being attacked from inside? The Pakistani Taliban were attacking the state of Pakistan. You know, General Musharraf, there were 2 suicide attacks, insider attacks, because there were sympathies for the Mujahideen from within the army. So 2 suicide attacks on him. Benazir Bhutto was assassinated by the Pakistani Taliban because she was considered a collaborator with the US. So was Pakistan in a position to then take on the Afghan Taliban? Our heads of state should have clearly stated. They should have told the Americans, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. I would have done that. Where we lost out was we had these weak, corrupt heads of states who did not stand up to the US. So let me just clarify about the Haqqani. Haqqani tribe is in Afghanistan. It's a tribe there. Some of the Haqqani leadership one was born in a Pakistani refugee camp. So,
And they go back and forth across the border.
there was, uh, there is no border. There was never any border. The border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, the Durand line, there was no. My government is the first time we have fenced that border. This is the first time. So that's one aspect. Now you talk about the ideology of Taliban. My ideology is in Pakistan. We follow what we consider our Sharia. We are following our line. So let the Taliban, what we hope is, in time, they will, with a consensus, with an inclusive government, they will evolve. But Becky, have we got any choice right now? Now tell me, if you do not back this government and do not help the people of Afghanistan right now, it's not a question of Taliban, it's people of Afghanistan. If the world international community does not help them, what choice have we got?
In an op-ed in the Washington Post in June, you wrote, quote, "In the past, Pakistan made a mistake by choosing between warring Afghan parties, but we have learned from that experience." How? Because your critics suggest that a, quote, "victory for Pakistan in Afghanistan," which is what many say is the case, is Pyrrhic. That playing a double game has now created blowback in terms of your own national security.
Becky, in the 90s, Pakistan backed one of the factions, the other faction, Northern Alliance, or Ahmad Shah Massoud, then went against Pakistan. I felt it was a big mistake. I felt Pakistan should never have had any favorites. I feel that the Afghan people cannot be controlled from outside. So therefore, whoever is a government in Afghanistan, we should just deal with them. And my government, we reached out. I called Ahmad Shah Massoud's brothers over, invited them over to Pakistan. We told them exactly the same thing. We called the Hazara community, Uzbeks. We tried to tell all of them that, look, whatever our policy was in the past, we now believe that whoever is in power in Afghanistan, we will have no favorites.
You say that you will have no favorites, but there is practically no opposition or other groups active in Afghanistan at the moment because the Taliban have taken over. And you have been accused by Massoud's National Resistance Front of getting involved in the damage and destruction that's been done to their group in Panjshir. Has Pakistan been pawns in that conflict, that part of the conflict?
Becky, do you know, we are as shocked and surprised as everyone of what has happened in Afghanistan. Our intelligence agency, ISI, gave us a report that number one, that the Afghan government, after the US leaves, would last for months afterwards. But they would fall, but it would last for months. Secondly, according to our intelligence agencies, Taliban would not be able to take over all of Afghanistan. They would be able to take over the Pashtun areas, which is almost half, but they would not be able to, and there would be a protracted civil war, which is why we tried our best. I called over the Taliban leadership, Mullah Brother, who's the vice prime minister. I called them over. We tried our best to make them understand that since you should not try and take over Afghanistan militarily, you should have an inclusive government, because otherwise there will be a protracted civil war. So we were as surprised. None of us expected what happened in Afghanistan.
Briefly, how would you qualify the US-Pakistan relationship today? And what sort of relationship do you want to see with the US?
Unfortunately, our relationship during this whole, the US occupation of Afghanistan was a terrible relationship. It was, the US said we are paying Pakistan, and they paid us $9 billion for civilian aid and $11 billion for military aid. And they said, we are paying you, and so we were like a hired gun. In Pakistan, people, I'm not talking about the leadership because I think we were let down by our leadership. The people felt that here, by joining the US, we had these bombs going on everywhere. Benazir Bhutto was killed because of that. Um, uh, uh, our economy tanked. I mean, we $150 billion plus we lost to the economy. So here we were on this level. The US felt that we were supposed to make them win the war in Afghanistan, which we never could. And so therefore we had this terrible relationship based on mistrust. What I would like a relationship with the US is now, like the US has a relationship with India. You know, not one-dimensional relationship where they're paying us to fight. We want a normal relationship.
So, responding to the fact that Joe Biden has not contacted you directly, your national security advisor recently said, and I quote, "If a phone call is a concession, if a security relationship is a concession, Pakistan has options," he said. Is China that option? And given the current state of relations between the US and China, is that a veiled threat of sorts?
I don't actually know in what context he said it, but I can say one thing, that if President Biden didn't call, I mean, what he's been through, I'm watching him, what he's been through. It's, you know, he's been blamed for this, you know, the exit from Afghanistan. I thought he actually did the only thing right. What else could he have done? Because how could you ever be prepared for the army capitulating 2 weeks before? So therefore, I mean, I would imagine he's very busy. But our relationship with the US is not just dependent upon a phone call. It needs to be a multi-dimensional relationship.
Do you consider the US pushing Pakistan into the arms of China at present in an effort to secure your own stability and economic prosperity going forward? Are you choosing a side effectively at this point?
Becky, our relationship with China goes back 70 years. It's a very strong relationship. It was Pakistan which opened the doors of the US to China in 1970 when Dr. Henry Kissinger was introduced to China, or we were the go-between. So, I mean, our China relationship is not dependent on what it is with US. We would like a normal relationship with the US, I repeat, like it has with India.
Antony Blinken suggested that Pakistan's role in Afghanistan has been shaped by its concerns about its enemy and neighbour, India, and its role in Afghanistan. He didn't elaborate. Would you care to? Just out of interest.
Yes, of course. I repeat, we joined the US war, dislodged a friendly Pakistani, which was friendly to Pakistan, and got in a government that was pro-India. India conducted a series of terrorist attacks within Pakistan. They backed Tehreek-e-Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban. They backed the Baloch terrorists, and they conducted a series of attacks. Recently, there was an attack on the Chinese, a terrorist attack. We know it was through Pakistani Taliban who were backed by the Indians. So, yes, it was. Look, a country 7 times the smaller of its eastern neighbor, 3 wars fought with them, and then in Afghanistan with 2,600-kilometer border with Pakistan, if a pro-India government comes in, obviously for the security of Pakistan, there was this worry that we would be hemmed in from both sides.
Does it worry you, the anti-China protest you're seeing here in Pakistan today, as you move towards better relations and increased relations with China?
Sorry, anti-China.
You know, you do see Pakistan's population not as twinned at the hip, as it were, or as enthusiastic about the prospect of further relations with China. Perhaps more so, certainly less so than the establishment.
The people of Pakistan have the great, you know why people of Pakistan all have this deep relationship with China? Because in 1962 there was a war between India and China. Then again when India was threatening us in Kashmir, there was this, India-China had this standoff. People of Pakistan feel that China in all our difficult times has stood with us. So, I mean, if one of the few countries that the people in Pakistan have this close affection to is China.
I want to talk about women's rights, Prime Minister. In your 2018 party manifesto, you devote a whole section to women. quote, "We will effectively implement initiatives to increase women's access to education, healthcare, economic opportunity and legal protection." The women of Afghanistan today have nothing like that under this Taliban government. How much can you accept that they are rescinding women's rights? How much can you sit as a neighbour and accept that?
Becky, if you empower your women through education, women will get their own rights.
Which the Taliban won't allow for kids over the age of 8.
As far as I've seen, that they have given statements that they will allow women to study in university and so on. Okay?
We are
But
hearing...
in Pakistan, what we have done is we have actually paid stipends to poor families to get their girls to study in school. Because we feel if the child studies, if they have education, they will get their own rights.
Are men and women equal in your eyes?
Just one point. No foreign country can impose women's rights on another country. The women in England went through a struggle to get their rights. The suffragettes went through a big struggle.
I'm asking you because this is really relevant to the issue of this interim Taliban government. Should women have access to the same roles in public and in private life?
Of course, women should have the ability in a society to fulfill their potential in life.
So you won't be able to support a Taliban government that doesn't allow that? Is that what you're telling me?
No. What I'm saying is that you cannot impose women's rights from abroad. It's never happened in human history. But what you can help them, and that's why the international community should engage with them, they should incentivize them. And so far...
These are basic human rights. You can't incentivize a government...
Incentivize them to educate
with basic human rights.
Becky, incentivize them to educate their girls, their women. They will get their rights. Afghan women are strong.
Let me just talk about some issues of women's rights here, finally, in Pakistan. Earlier this summer, the daughter of a former Pakistani diplomat, Noor Muqaddam, died after being allegedly tortured and killed by an acquaintance. What's your response to that case?
I'm following that case personally. It is one of the most horrific cases that shocked the country, and we will ensure that he gets punished. The state will ensure, and as I said, I'm following that case personally.
Activists have demanded Parliament pass a law criminalising domestic violence. Where do you stand on that, and do you think that will happen?
We have, our government has passed the maximum number of laws for protection of women. We have not only incentivized parents to send their child to school, we have a special program where we help women find the real problem is rural women. And even in Afghanistan, there's a difference between urban women and rural women. So we are actually empowering them in rural areas so they can improve their living, giving them loans.
Do you support calls for more empowerment, more rights for Pakistani women?
Of course. But Becky, my basic thing, look, my family, one of my sisters is a doctor, one is an economist, one is a businesswoman. We have strong women in our family. Why? Because they were educated. I believe if you educate your women, they will get their position in society. They will fulfill their potential.
People have been protesting across Afghanistan in the past couple of weeks. Finally, I just want you to explain why you think these anti-Pakistan protests by hundreds of Afghans today are going on. They certainly seem convinced of Pakistan's involvement in their country's affairs.
Because Becky, the Afghan government, for their failures, they kept blaming Pakistan. I went to see Ashraf Ghani earlier this year. I assured him, I told him we will do anything for a peace between you and inclusive government, except take military action. Because military action, it cost Pakistan a lot. We said we will not take any military action, but everything else we will do to ensure that there is there is an inclusive government, a political dialogue. It was because of us that the Taliban started talking to the US. And we tried our best to make them sit with the Afghan government. The Taliban were ready for having an inclusive government with everyone else, but they refused to sit with the Afghan government. They believed it was a puppet government. Now, the Afghan government kept blaming Pakistan. Unfortunately, the Afghan government is to be blamed. If Afghan government had given good governance, if they had not so much corruption in their ranks, maybe they would have had more acceptability in Afghanistan. Why did 300,000 Afghan troops, why did they surrender without a fight? And if you do a proper analysis of that, you will know why the US failed and the Taliban succeeded.
I promised to ask you about the risks to Pakistan's national security if the situation in Afghanistan doesn't improve. So explain what you believe those risks are and just how concerned you are at present.
The biggest concern are refugees. We already have 3 million refugees in Pakistan. Our country cannot afford more refugees. We have come out of a very difficult economic situation. We cannot take more refugees. The second worry is terrorism. We had 3 sets of terrorists in Afghanistan using the soil to attack us: ISIS, Pakistani Taliban, and the Baloch terrorists. So if there is chaos in Afghanistan, if there's not stability there, then we have these 2 major problems looming in front of us. We are the country that is going to suffer the most.
With that, we'll leave it there. Thank you.